Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ergo Expo webinar, Getting the Injury Prevention Solution You Need, How to Find the Best Fit and Get the Yes from Your Boss, presented by Kevin Farthing, Environmental Health and Safety Manager for Spartan Corporation, and Kari Herndon, Lead Clinical Specialist for BTE Technologies. Before I hand it over to Kevin, let's quickly review a few things, especially for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. If you can hear me, you should be all set. But if you encounter any technical issues during today's webinar, please contact WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-779-3239. There will likely be time for a few questions at the end of today's presentation, but you can input your questions anytime using the Q&A panel on your screen. The presentation team will try to respond to your questions. There is no call-in question time, so all questions do need to be submitted through the Q&A section of the program. If you are looking to gain CEUs and continuing certification points today, please note that at the end of the webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen. Once you complete the survey, you'll be able to print a certificate of completion. The certificate can be used when you apply for CEUs and COC points directly with BCSP, BCPE, and other accrediting organizations. Today's webinar will be posted alongside other previous presentations on the webinar's webpage of ergoexpo.com. It'll be there in about a week. These free on-demand presentations covering a variety of topics can be viewed by you and your colleagues at your convenience. And if you find today's webinar useful, please be sure to mark your calendars to join us at the 28th Annual National Ergonomics Conference and Ergo Expo in Las Vegas, August 20th through the 23rd, 2019. This is being held at the Paris Las Vegas Hotel. At the conference, you'll find over 50 sessions that will help you and your organization create and maximize an ergonomics and safety program for any type of work environment. The event features the largest expo of its kind with hundreds of products on display. Without further delay, I am pleased to introduce Kevin Farthing and Kari Herndon, our presenters for today. Kevin Farthing brings 20 years of experience in manufacturing engineering, industrial engineering, and environmental health and safety management. He is a board-certified associate safety professional, a certified associate safety and health manager, and is a certified Six Sigma black belt. Kevin has a BS in industrial technology as well as an MBA. He has experience in driving highly successful work injury prevention programs across many types of manufacturing, and in 2018, Kevin was awarded the Risk and Insurance All-Star Award. Kari Herndon, as a lead clinical specialist for BTE, as a licensed and certified occupational therapist assistant and certified ergonomic assessment specialist, she has over 20 years of experience providing injury prevention services in the state of Florida and throughout the United States. As a lead clinician for BTE's Workforce Solutions team, Kari delivers client-driven services by performing physical demand analyses, ergonomic evaluations, and post-offer employment protocols utilizing BTE's proprietary technology and processes. Kari has provided injury prevention services across multiple industries, including manufacturing, maritime, medical, education, energy, and transportation. And with that, Kevin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk today about how we're going to get solutions approved, identify solutions, and get the yes from your boss. You know, we all have these great ideas, but getting the funding and getting the approval is the next step to this, and sometimes it's the most difficult step of any improvement process. Sorry, everyone, I didn't have control of this thing. Our learning objectives today are how to better pinpoint and find your risk and the benchmarks for your company, understand the essential data to project your real ROI, identify the meaningful impact and the metrics that work for you, evaluate the prevention programs and find out what best suits your needs, and better understand the perspective and common objectives of your upper leadership team. That's the most important thing we're going to talk about. So understanding that leadership team and understanding how to present this stuff to your leadership team. And then hopefully you're going to walk away confident in your ability to find the best solution and present the solution and sell it internally and get the yes from your boss. A little bit about Spartan. We manufacture sonobuoys for the U.S. Navy. Our products primarily hunt down, communicate with submarines. We have a little over 600, actually over 700 employees on site now. We're continually growing with close to 500 manufacturing employees now. Our processes, even though electronics is in our name, it's primarily small mechanical assembly, kind of a Rube Goldberg device, if you will, for our sonobuoy. We won the Manufacturer Association of Florida Manufacturer of the Year in 2015, and we were recognized by the Sterling Manufacturing Award for Business Excellence in 2018. So our journey with what we're going to talk about, we're going to use an example of a program that I was able to get implemented here to sell some of the concepts and teach some of the concepts that I use. We had a 5-year trend of increasing frequency of MSD injuries. We'll touch on that chart a little bit later. And with that, we had increasing workers' comp costs, increased absenteeism, a lot of the side things that go along with increased MSD injuries. We identified a significant source. We identified the solution to the program, gained management buy-in, implemented that solution. We've now achieved over 50% reduction in our MSD injuries, and we're saving or avoiding over $700,000 per year. Let's jump right into how we identify problems. We review the accident reports, look for trends, data in there, review the workers' comp claims for the same types of things, evaluate the high turnover positions. You know, why are people leaving? A lot of times people leave because the job hurts them, and we don't find out about those injuries. They just go on to work somewhere else. And we compare the cost and impact of injuries as far as that's back into the workers' comp claims. What are the restricted work days associated with certain tasks? What are the lost work days as we tie those to certain tasks? So how did I identify the problems here specifically? So what we did is I went back 5 years, seemed to be a big enough chunk, or 4 years, and we compiled that data. And what did I look at? I looked at the injury type, the location of the injury, where in the plant did it happen, what body part was affected, what was the age, what was the gender, looking for something to come out of that data and jump out of the page at me. And the one that did was the length of employment at the time of injury. What we saw, and wasn't expecting it, you guys that look at this type of data know that you really expect the aging workforce to be an issue, not the newly hired workforce. What we found was that 40% of our injuries were occurring in the first 3 years of employment. If you spin that around, 10% of our workforce was experiencing 40% or more of our injuries. So we needed to address that 10%. Well, as we dug into this and we said, here's our problem. What could be causing early employment people to experience these injuries? The 3 things that we came up with were a lack of work hardening. We were bringing people in, not sending them through spring training, if you will, and sending them straight to work full speed. We're hiring candidates that are already injured or already have musculoskeletal problems. Or 3, we're hiring candidates that are just not able to do the job. You know, a poor match of the person to the position without knowing what the physical capabilities of that person are. So in evaluating the solutions, we saw the problem. We had those 3 major things that we saw would contribute to that 10% causing 40% of our injuries. So the criteria for the solution is we're looking for a solution that addresses the sources of the injury. Will the solution work within our culture? You know, all of our cultures are different, certainly. And is there someone else that has had success with the solution? Are we a pioneer, or can we learn from other people's lessons and other people's mistakes? The next step, once we find a solution, is find a vendor to help us implement that solution, or find the vendor with the solution if we didn't identify the solution on our own. It's important to me that when you're selecting vendors, you find someone that's going to be a partner and someone that's going to help you find the right solution, not try to sell you what they have. So a vendor with multiple solutions, to me, is very beneficial, and that's what we did here, and we found their best solution that fit our problem. And also, will that vendor help you with implementation, and do they have a plan, a boilerplate to help you get started and help you roll through this without having to reinvent the wheel? And then the last is look at the processes. What is the solution going to take to implement? There's a lot to these solutions beyond the purchase order, and what happens after the purchase order, and how difficult is that going to be, and how is that going to flow, and again, is the vendor going to help you with that process? So out of this, we chose post-offer employment testing as our solution. The reason we chose this is it directly affected two of the three things. If you remember, we said work hardening, people were previously injured or they just couldn't do the job. So through the post-offer employment test, we were able to identify and eliminate employees from going into the workforce here that had previous injuries or that just were not physically able to do the job. Kari?
So before I get into what or who BTE is, I first want to give Kevin praise, because with the amount of work that he put into his own discovery before he ever brought BTE into his solution, frankly, it's very rare that we find individuals like Kevin with that kind of analytical mind and his approach to everything. So we're definitely glad that he brought us in to help him with his issues. So before I get into the actual POET program, I want to just give a brief overview of who we are. So BTE is unique. We offer two different areas of expertise. The first one is we offer rehabilitation and evaluation equipment, but we also perform workforce solution and services. But the goal is the same across the board, and that's to help our clients optimize the productivity, lower absenteeism, improve safety, reduce injuries and claim costs, and ultimately improving employee performance. So at our Hanover office, that's where we design, engineer, manufacture all of the functional evaluation and rehabilitation equipment, and that's what you see in the slide right here. That's our ER system, and the gentleman that's pulling on it, basically this is the system that we use for our POET program. This equipment, along with all of our others, we have several clinics, hundreds of clinics located throughout the United States and Canada, and we also work with over 40 countries, so pretty impressive. In our Denver office, that's our hub for our Workforce Solutions division. There we offer employers a variety of injury reduction programs. Just like Kevin said, I mean, not everybody needs the POET program, but there's definitely something that we can offer in terms of programs. We do physical demand analysis, we do the post-offer employment testing, ergonomic interventions, on-site early intervention programs, and functional capacity evaluations. And that's just a few of the things that we do. So for Spartan, the solution was offering them what we call a POET program, and that stands for post-offer employment. The goal of a POET is to objectively determine the candidate's ability to perform the essential functions of the job that they are being offered. So there's a couple of points that I want to mention here, and the first one is that this test is performed after an individual has been offered the job, thus the post-offer pre-employment aspect of the name. It is considered a medical test, and it is subject to the EEOC's uniform testing guidelines. Prior to any test deployment, the POET itself, it goes through a very rigorous validation process. We want to ensure that we test against the physical demands that are in fact considered essential. And there's a difference between what's considered essential and what's considered marginal. And so I think that's one of the main components that we make sure that we're following. We also take a look at making sure that that there is a business necessity for a POET program. We also want to make sure that the program that we implement has minimal adverse or no adverse impact. And we also want to make sure that if this particular test is being conducted in multiple locations, we definitely want to make sure that this test is performed in a very standardized and uniform way, and that's to eliminate any form of test bias. Everybody is getting the exact same fair shake on passing the POET. So on this particular slide, and this is kind of like an overall view of the POET program, there are many stages. We'll get into that a little bit later on, but overall, we observe the task performed, we measure that task, and then we simulate that demand in a testing environment. So in this particular slide, you see obviously a gentleman with a pallet jack. We're testing it utilizing the software system that we utilize at BTE, and we then test that same demand in a simulated environment, replicating what it is that we saw on site. This, I think, is very key because test components have to tie into those physical demands. So, for example, if there was an arbitrary lift demand of, say, 50 pounds, and you have somebody being tested on their ability to lift 50 pounds from, say, floor to waist height, there is an absolute must that that particular test be tied into a physical demand that is required on the job. So that needs to be either one particular item, or it needs to be several items. But then more importantly, you need to make sure that the testing parameters that you tested in also match. So for example, if you had somebody lifting above and over shoulder 50 pounds, there better be something at the job site that was measured that requires that same thing. Now, luckily for Kevin, he's actually went through his entire plant and eliminated all the above shoulder requirements before I even got on to the floor. So again, very lucky to have somebody like Kevin asking us to work with him. So delving a little bit deeper into the POET process, our first step is to evaluate what the essential functions are. There is a difference between the essential function versus marginal function. Next, we want to go on-site and we collect the data. This is where we go on-site, we obtain the measurements, and then what we're going to do with that data is we're going to analyze it. We're looking at several samples. If there is a particular cart that is a requirement to push and pull throughout a plant, I would like to not only get several trials of that particular cart, but if there's more than one of those carts, say there's 5 located throughout the facility, I probably try to get my hands on all 5 of those so that I've got ample data behind any tests that I decide are what I would consider relevant for the POET test. Next step is we want to create or develop the test. We, generally speaking, I probably have maybe, say, 8 to 10 different test components. Not all of them make it to the actual live POET, but that's okay. We go through each one of those through a very rigorous validation process, and not all of them make the cut, and that's okay. Once we've got the test put together, the next step, and this is a vital step in the validation process, is we take the incumbents or the current employees through that test. And that's very important because we certainly want to make sure that people that are actually working in those positions are able to perform well in our test. If we find a high incidence of people not able to meet those demands, well then we need to ask ourselves a couple questions. Do we have the test set up correct? Were the instructions that we gave the individual during the test, were those correct? Could it be that maybe that particular physical demand is just too hard, and maybe that's something that we need to bring back to somebody like Kevin to say, hey, maybe this needs to be engineered out. So there's a lot of things that kind of happen during the incumbent testing. Once we've got the test through a test, we go through a test deployment. The standards have been established. Then the next thing is we go through a post-deployment assessment. And what the post-deployment assessment is from the existing people that start to go through the POET program, we want to keep an eye on that data. And for BTE, we have what's called a data queue. And what that does is it collects all this data that we're able to then take a look at what the aggregate results are. And if we have any particular test component that the majority of the candidates are either not doing well in, or we've got an extremely high overall fail rate, well, then that's something that we need to discuss and bring to the employer.
All right, thanks, Kari, for explaining the POET test. We're going to circle back a little bit to where we were before in selling internally. So you've got your solution, you got your source identified. Some things we're going to cover in the next slides is understanding and defining that strategy, measuring and estimating your ROI, and communicating that solution to the team so you can get the approval to move forward. Some of the keys to selling solutions. You know, if we're going to sell something, we've got to get leadership support for that program. You know, they have to understand why we want the program. And the best way to do that is through getting your ROI and your reductions of injury and your turnover frequency. Use that data to show them what they can expect from the program and develop strategies for selecting the right interventions. So let's get into the weeds a little bit here. One of my favorite phrases is collect the data, analyze the data, present the data, and let the data tell the story. The secret here is understanding your audience and understanding how they need that data presented to them. Been with a couple of different companies, and it seems like every leadership team likes to see things just a little bit different. And the more you understand the audience, the better results you're going to have. You know, one of the things that we all get focused on is total reduction in cost. You know, what's the cost? What's my reduction in cost going to be? Some of these programs, especially POET, through our experience, we've had improved worker satisfaction. We think we're seeing some improved turnover. We haven't quantified that yet. We've got some improved efficiency. You know, people that aren't in pain, that are able to do the job, do a better job. But if you can get in front of those and predict those and include that in your data sets for what your projected savings are going to be, that's really going to help you sell the story. And the last one there is the cost of inaction. You know, we're going to cover a slide here a little later that will display that. But what does it cost me to do nothing? And sometimes that's your most powerful selling tool. You can project what you're going to save, but if you can say, if we do nothing, here's what's going to happen. And if we don't like what that looks like, then we know we have to do something. And then that's when you can use the data for your expected savings for your program to help you sell that. So in helping you sell this stuff, you're not on an island. You know, get subject matter experts in there, get your vendors, get the people to help you sell the program. Get them in front of your management team. Don't pass along knowledge to your management team, second knowledge. If you can get the sales team or get the expert from your vendor in front of management, it will really help. I can say firsthand with the POET program, that was a huge tipping point in getting this program approved. Get and check your references. You know, another powerful part in selling this particular program and other ones is a quick phone call to another company or another customer that's using this product. What has been your results? Can you share with me what that is? And then the last two there is be persistent and maintain enthusiasm. You come out and you present these high initial outlay programs, you're going to meet some resistance. You have to believe in that solution, and you have to let them know you believe in that solution. When you get that no, you can't back up. You have to hesitate, give them time to catch their breath, find another way, find another avenue, find something else to get their attention. Because if you remain enthusiastic about it and you believe what you're trying to implement and you believe that that will work, and it shows to your management team, that's the big key to getting the approval for these programs. So we've sold this program. The management team said, yes, Kevin, we're tired of listening to you. Let's give you the money. Let's move forward to this. What are we going to do? So a program like POET, we had to develop the process plan. We had to say, what does this look like? What are the steps? What do we have to do to get through collecting more initial data, giving that data to BTE, getting those guys into the plant to do our on-site physical demands analysis to measure our actual forces to build the POET program data. Then we have to communicate that. We have to communicate that to the people on the floor, the management team, the supervisors. We're going to be out here measuring your processes, digging through your processes, why we're here, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then hold a pre-launch meeting to communicate all of that.
So then Kevin brings me on site. So I would have to say by far this is definitely kind of the funnest part of my job. I get to go to places like Spartan, and I get to get on the floor and kind of watch how everything's made. And so during the on-site data collection, basically I'm looking at two major kind of groupings of situations. I'm looking at force demands and posture demands. And within both of these, I'm looking at the most common physical demands that are being performed, but then I'm also looking at those extreme conditions and looking for like worst case scenarios. So under the force demands, that's going to include your lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, gripping, pinching. The tools that I have are just in this particular slide. You see, I have a load cell, and I am able to not only capture data related to the peak force required, but then also I'm able to record what the sustained force requirements are to move an object or to grip a particular set of pliers and such. In addition to just getting that data point of the force, it's important for us to make sure that we're recording the position requirements to perform that particular demand. And so I am looking at not only the upper body, whether or not the elbow is extended or if you can keep your arm close to your body, the forearm rotation. I'm looking at the grip demand. I'm also looking at the type of stance that a person is standing in, because all of those factors play into how we're able to do the force. The other component that I'm looking at when it comes to force is if there's an alternative way that somebody can perform that same task. So a lot of times we might see somebody carrying an extra large load with manually. Come to find out, there is a mechanical version of being able to push that object, but that particular worker chooses not to use it. So it's important to ask those kind of questions to verify if those particular physical demands or forces that you're looking at are in fact requirements and they are essential physical demands. The other demand that I look at are posture demands. So I look at different things when it comes to posture. And when I think of posture, I'm looking for those non-neutral positions. So these are things like stooping, bending, having to reach above shoulder, having to work in a kneeling position. So the Department of Labor, they've identified ratings of frequency, and those are occasional, frequent, and constant. But then I'm also looking at that functional range of motion that's required. So I'm looking at heights, I'm looking at for example, with axial rotation, cervical rotation requirements. Do they have to look to the left and to the right, or do they only have to look to the left? I'm looking for situations such as those. The last thing that I'm looking in postures is I'm looking for whether or not that posture is considered a sustained posture or a dynamic posture. And what I mean by that is a sustained posture is something that somebody has to work for a prolonged period of time while maintaining that posture. I consider the dynamic postures those that you have to work in and out of, like if somebody had to go in and out of a kneeling position. So for protocol development, when I'm collecting the data, as I mentioned previously, it's important to take multiple trials of whatever it is that I'm capturing, especially if I know that it's going to likely end up in a POET. Again, I'm looking for the most common and the most extreme conditions. So, for example, if I've got a pallet jack and a worker is having to move an object with a pallet jack, it might be on a flat surface 50% of the time, but I need to make sure that there aren't other extreme conditions that I have to consider, like if there's any ramps or if there's any rough terrain. Outdoor pushing and pulling of a pallet jack is much different than a pallet jack that's pushed on an even concrete surface. For any demands that, from an ergonomic perspective, that we find are just way too high, we really don't consider them for POET testing, but there's certainly something that I want to report to somebody like Kevin to make sure that he's aware that that's probably something that they're going to need to investigate. The other things that I take into consideration when I'm selecting a particular demand that I measured on site is whether or not I can adequately replicate that demand in a testing environment. Again, the test that you design has to replicate the physical demand that's measured on site. If it does not, then it's not considered a valid test. The next thing that we do is establish those standards. Those standards are based on multiple values, and so that's something that we typically do with the employer. We display the data for them, so that decision is generally made together. The last thing we do, as mentioned previously, is we want to make sure that that test, it goes through at least internal or incumbent testing to make sure that test is appropriate before we ever take it out to a live environment. So speaking of incumbent testing, I wanted to spend a little bit of time just to show you what I mean by that. In this particular slide, what you see is the display of it's the performance data of somebody that is pushing into that ER unit that we showed in those previous slides. What's nice about this particular test is that our testing system affords us the ability to, this is a single motion, but it measures what the left arm produces, and it measures what the right arm produces, and then it provides us a combined average. So let's take that pallet jack as an example. If I measured a pallet jack on site and it weighed, or the force requirement was 90 pounds, this test performance demonstrates this particular person's ability to provide 127 pounds of force. And so for this particular scenario, I feel that this person could confidently perform the pallet jack push given this information. Notice that it also gives me a coefficient of variance. It's important whenever you are creating any sort of test that multiple trials are provided, and you make sure that that coefficient of variance is a relatively low number, because we just don't want anybody jerking on our unit and giving us an explosive measure when that would be an unsafe practice while they were on site. So at the end of our on-site visit, and after we had gone through test determination, test validation, what we came up with was a variety of tests. Now, as it stands today, this is the Spartan POET design. This was not what we started with. This is what we have today. And so Kevin and I will talk a little bit later about that. But for his particular test, we provide a key pinch test, and this is a requirement that is for both hands. The next thing that we have is what's considered a narrow or standard grip test. Now, both hands are tested, but one or the other hand has to meet the standard to pass that particular test. The next one is a wide grip, so it is another grip test, only it's at a bit wider spans. Again, both hands are tested. Only one hand has to pass the standard. We then have a cart push test. We also have a pallet push test and a pallet jack pull test. We have a floor to waist lifting test. And then we have a horizontal reaching test where they're working in a position where they're having to reach at varying angles between the waist and chest height. So next, Kevin and I are going to talk about a couple of specific POET testing parameters that we went through. Now, this first we're going to be talking about an oven cart, and then we'll be talking about some wire strippers, and we'll follow up with some banding cutters. But you'll notice this oven cart push is actually not on Kevin's current POET protocol. So we will tell you why.
Let me provide the backstory on this one a little bit. This was initially in our POET test. In the first week of our POET test, we experienced a very high fallout. It was over a 50% fail rate. We just certainly did not expect that. And we went back and looked at the data and found out that the bulk of those failures was due to this oven cart push and pull. The force was in our plant, so we had to continue testing for it. So our solution to this was, first off, let's get more stronger people to get in there and do this job and limit who does the job while we find a solution. But at the end of the day, we eliminated this force from the plant by purchasing an electric push-pull cart, and we are working toward smaller ovens to completely remove that cart from the plant, because we know even though we have a mechanical device, someone's going to sneak in there and use that cart without the mechanical device. So the good part about this is the test eliminates hiring unnecessary or incapable people, but it also helps you look at your process and eliminate things from your process that put folks at risk. Go back.
So before we move on to the next slide, I want to point out from BTE's perspective, so Kevin brought us on site to take a look at this cart. He knew it was a physical demand requirement of this position. There is no other way to get this cart into the oven other than what you see here. So you see this gal pushing. Notice that she's having to place her hands kind of in a midline chest position. It's a very narrow grip, but this is what she did. So I'd like to show you now the results of our testing. So here's a typical display of what I see on my computer and our software systems. You'll see that I have taken 5 trials of this particular push. The average of the peak forces that were applied was 71.4 pounds. Now, if you just think about pushing 71.4 pounds, it really doesn't seem like it's that much effort. However, if you take into consideration the hand positioning requirements and the fact that there aren't formal handholds, the narrow grip requirement, and notice on this particular graph the erratic nature of my graph. Typically, if I am performing this push on a smooth surface, you'll see a nice bell-shaped curve. This is not what we experience here. This demonstrates clearly to that the push is erratic, and it's because there was a metal plate that I had to kind of push the cart over. So when I shared this with Kevin, this gives him that information necessary, beyond testing people and realizing, okay, no one's going to be able to pass this. This speaks volumes to whether or not this should even exist as part of their demands on site.
Yeah, again, that's let the data tell the story.
So here was the test setup. We were successful in replicating the test. But next to it is its lovely replacement. So that's why this is no longer a part of Kevin's POET program.
The next one we're going to talk about is wire stripping. These wire strippers shown on the slide here look fairly mundane. Didn't really expect that to be a problem, but Kari pointed out and said, I really don't like the look of those wire strippers. Let's take a look at those and measure those wire strippers.
So again, when I'm on site, what we found was that the standard required of those wire strippers was 54.6 pounds. Now, it's a little high, but it was definitely something that is done very frequently and throughout Kevin's production floor. So it was definitely something that is worthy of testing. Again, this test the requirement is either in one hand or the other, not both hands.
And the reason we bring this one up is even at the 54.6 pounds, that's a pretty good grip, but we are still seeing some injuries in this area, even though it's with our older employees. And I was able to use the data from the POET test to help my management team understand that we needed a better solution to strip wires that would be more ergonomically friendly. And we identified pneumatic strippers to put in probably 80% of the places on the floor, and we've eliminated all but maybe 7 sets of these strippers on our floor. We're not able to take this completely out of the test, but because of the data collected from the test and understanding the risk we're putting our people at, we're able to use that data to greatly reduce that risk on the floor and help affect our total injury rates.
So the last thing that we want to look at, Kevin brought to my attention the use of these manual banding cutters. So again, we collected the data and it came out with an average grip strength requirement of 58.3 pounds. Now, that particular number doesn't seem that far off from the wire strippers that we just saw. The difference with this particular demand was that there was a 4-inch span of the arms of this band cutter. So I immediately came to Kevin with this and I said, well, Kevin, I don't even think I would be able to perform this particular test. Not that I'm that strong, but I'd like to think I am. Kevin, what happened?
So as part of this, during the demands analysis, I was one of the test pigs there. So I grabbed the cutters and cut through one piece of banding, and I immediately made the decision that none of my employees should be subjected to that. I took the 2 pairs of banding cutters that were on the floor, took them apart, and threw them in the scrap metal bin, and gave them an alternate way to cut the banding while we found a solution. We overnighted in an electric banding cutter that basically zero force for the employee other than the weight of the cutter, and rather than subject our people to this force, we got it completely off the floor. Without this PDA being performed, we probably would have walked by and said that looks difficult, but it never would have hit home that we needed to get that off the floor. So we've gone through some of the success examples, some of the things that we may not have thought about. So how do you measure the success, the outcome of the program? How do you measure the ROI? And how do you communicate the success back to the stakeholders? Because programs like this and many of our programs, yeah, we need initial funding, but we also need subsequent funding to keep the program going throughout the year. So everyone needs to understand what the benefit of the program is, and part of that is your additional and unexpected benefits of reduced turnover, improved morale, improved productivity, etc. So this chart here, I've referred to it a couple of times. This chart tells the story. You know, when I say let the data tell the story, this chart kind of does that. So you look at the 5 years previous to FY17, so FY's fiscal year, so we're going fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 16, or the 5 years of data that we analyzed, and we implemented the POET program at the start of fiscal year 17. So we had that 5-year trend. So the first thing I put in front of the group was, if we do nothing, what does fiscal year 17, 18, 19, 20 look like? We did not like that picture. I got their attention immediately. You could also see the increasing trend, especially starting FY13, the increasing trend in people that have been here less than 1 year were getting injured. So we implemented the POET program in FY17. I should back up and say this chart is filtered. This only includes my musculoskeletal injuries. I don't have my trips, cuts, falls, things like that in there. So you can see it takes a year or so to see an impact of the program. We did see some initial impact, but you can see as the fiscal year 19, that's 6 months of data there. Our FY19 started in July of 2018. So 2017, we saw an overall injury reduction, and we saw some injury reduction in people from 1 to 4 years. But we started POET testing people, and you see no injuries of anyone here less than 1 year, because we implemented that in July. So we had an immediate impact on that. Fiscal year 18, we continued to see a drop in the 1 to 4 year injuries. We had an overall increase, which made most of us nervous. And you see the one injury there from less than 1 year, that was not of a POET-tested individual. That was actually an individual that was hired the week that we started our POET testing. Had we started 1 week earlier, we would have avoided that particular injury. So then you look at fiscal year 19. We experienced our first injury of a POET-tested employee. So, we're not going to eliminate all injuries. We're just going to eliminate the risk of injury. And with risk comes, people do get hurt occasionally. But our total injury rate is dramatically less. And I can attribute most of my reduction in musculoskeletal injuries to the POET testing program and all of the components that it brings in. Selecting the right individuals, understanding where to put individuals when they get here, and the side part of what we talked about in the previous couple of slides is identifying risk and getting those risks out of the plant. Little different way to tell the story. This one has if we look at our musculoskeletal injuries per year, the 3 years prior and the 3 years after implementation in 2017, it's important to note that this slide says over 150 employees have been added. It's probably more than 200 at this point. So since 2017, we have been in a period of growth and adding production positions to the floor, but our injury rates are reducing. So that greater shows the cost benefits and the effectiveness of the program. Little different way of telling the story. This is what I show to my leadership team on a monthly basis. This chart shows the blue bars are the tested the employees that passed the test. The orange bars are those employees that failed the POET test and were not selected for hire. The gray line chart shows the cost of the program, and the yellow line shows our expected cost avoidance of the program. So you can see the gap there in the ROI is immediate. This puts numbers to it. We had some graphics there, but here's some numbers put to the program. In the first year of the program, our investment was $72,000, and our projected net return for that year is over $700,000, $702,000. 2018, our investment was over $102,000 because of the increased tests we had and increased hiring, and out of that, we're projecting a $729,000 net return for the year. Year to date, or through the 1st of December when this was all assembled, $29,000 investment for 2019 with a $207,000 net return. So for a 2.5 year period, we have our net return is over $1.4 million of cost avoidance. And a return on dollar invested, you can see there to the right. So you put this type of numbers in front of your management team and say, hey, give me $1, I'll give you 8. If they have the dollar to give you, you're going to get that dollar for the program. So celebrating success. Now, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, and the graphs that I showed there that I put in front of the leadership team, those are important. This program is working, and whether it's this program or any other program, this program is working. Make sure you communicate that the program's working. Get people to clap for you somehow when you present this data, and celebrate, what the impact to the program is. Early on, I met some resistance. Even after we brought the program in, there was some resistance, and one of my biggest resistors internally to the plant has walked into my office and said, there's no way this program's going away. Put this in your budget, make sure we have the money for it, and let's keep this moving forward.
And so it was under duress that we put this in the slideshow. But Kevin, we are so proud that Kevin received the 2018 Risk and Insurance All-Star Award. He's only one of 6 individuals throughout the United States that have received this award for 2018. So we're just very proud of his efforts, and we're definitely honored to be partnered with him.
Thank you, Kari.
You're welcome.
So in conclusion, we've used the POET as a strong example here, but we identify the problem, collect the data to find out what the problem is and understand it, identify a solution, Sell the solution. Use the data you collected. Let the data tell the story. Sell the solution. Implement the solution and make adjustments on the fly, as we demonstrated. Sometimes the initial results are not what you expect. You have to make some tweaks to the program to get it working the way you want, and then celebrate the success to sustain and keep the solution going. So do we have any questions?
Thank you, Kevin and Kari. We do have some questions. Thank you to all who submitted in the chat box. We have questions for both of you. First question is for Kevin, and that is the organization, is your organization or is the group that participated in this program a unionized labor force?
No, we are not.
Thank you for that. There were a few questions. Kari, this one is for you, around what happens when someone fails POET? Is there a plan for alternative hiring? Is there a determination made on reasonable accommodation? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, it really depends on the employer. So, and the program that they have implemented. When an individual does not meet one or more of the standards, they do not pass the POET, and so the offer is rescinded in most circumstances. There are some other employers that have multiple protocols, and one of the things that we have in our system, we have the capability of creating protocols that have multiple levels. So it might be that that particular applicant did not pass one level, but they may have passed an alternate level. With Spartan, they actually have a two-level protocol. And within that two-level protocol, the pallet jack is a requirement for their level 2 employee. So if they do not pass either the push or pull of the pallet jack, well, that means that they do not qualify for the job positions in level level 2, I'm sorry. So then in terms of if somebody outright does not pass the POET, again, it goes back to the employer. If the employer decides to set up a program where they can reapply and take the POET again after, say, 6 months, then they can perform that. Kevin, do you have a program like that for you?
Once people have failed the POET, if they express interest in coming to work still, we will let them retake the test after 6 months. And then the pallet jack, what we do there, for instance, is we mark their badge with a color code that says if you don't have this color badge, you're not permitted to use. Well, I said that backwards. If you have this color badge, you're not permitted to use the pallet jack. And that was a big one for us, and that's when I alluded earlier. It helps you put the right people in the right positions. We went in with one protocol and figured out through our fail rates we were going to have to split that in order to not have the POET be a hindrance to hiring and help us get the right people in the plant.
Thank you both. There is a question around how you validate what you measure against, say, an 8 or a 12-hour workday. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, sure. So in terms, and I believe we're talking about frequency. So with frequency, we, regardless if it's an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day, what we're going to do is we're going to allocate a frequency. If it's occasional, then it would be up to a third of the workday. Frequent would be anywhere from 34% to 66% of the workday, and then anything over 67% of the workday would be considered on a constant basis. And so we would create test designs based on those frequencies.
Thank you. We have a question that asks if this protocol is used returning an employee who has experienced an MSD.
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to utilizing this particular test for a new hire candidate, it is often used for a return to work fit for duty scenario. And so again, that's something that we utilize, and we receive referrals for the fit for duty where they would take that same test to make sure that when they return that they can still perform the physical demands of the job.
Thank you. Kevin, this question is for you. You mentioned measuring the cost of inaction, and you showed us some slides regarding injury cost avoidance. Are there other metrics that you use to help bring that message to your management?
That's a case-by-case answer. The cost of inaction is a huge one, and the rest of it really, to me, is just the real data. Collecting the data. As far as the metrics, it's like I said, it's going to be case by case. In this one, I was looking for contributing factors for what was causing the injuries that we were trying to avoid. The cost of inaction, again, is one of the primary ones that I like to use.
Thank you. If possible, for Kevin or Kari, could either of you discuss either within an organization or generally what a typical pass-fail rate is?
Sure, I can answer that kind of with globally for BTE. Right now, we see an overall fail rate of around 12%, but that actually ranges anywhere from 10 to 20% based on the physicality of the jobs and the poets that we develop. What's yours, Kevin?
We're right at 16% here.
Thank you. Another question around impact of overall health care cost reduction. Is that something that was looked at? Any plans to look at for either Kevin or Kari?
That would be interesting for us to look at and see if we have experienced that. The answer is no, we have not. I would love to dig into that data to further add to the cost, but to be honest with you, we're seeing such a payback with what we're already doing that the effort to find more cost savings is maybe not beneficial to my side at this time.
Kari, any thoughts on that?
I think Kevin did a pretty good job of explaining that.
I'd just like to follow up. I'm sure we would see that. It's just we just haven't taken the effort to figure that out.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Kevin and Kari. We are coming up to the top of the hour and want to certainly be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for your valuable insights today, Kevin and Kari. If you want to learn more about the issues and solutions we discussed today, you are going to want to be at the National Ergonomics Conference and Ergo Expo this August in Las Vegas. You do have our presenters' contact information on the screen. You can contact them if your question wasn't able to be answered during the time we had today. And again, this recorded webinar is available for playback. It will be posted on the website in about a week, and you'll be able to review it, get some of those insights again if you missed anything today or would like to share it with colleagues. I have one more final thank you, and that's to all of you. Thank you for joining us today as we all work towards creating a safer and more productive work environment. This concludes our webinar presentation. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please join us for next month's Ergo Expo webinar. Thank you.